Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Michaela Conley, HP Karina, Health Promotion Live, and yes, it is Friday again. I don't know how that keeps happening, but it seems to every week. So thanks for being here again, and so often. It's awesome to have you here. We have a especially large group today, which probably speaks to the excitement around the topic that Dr. Pam Peeke is going to talk about. Let me say, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we will save them for Pam at the end. And let's see, if you choose to use this for continuing education, great, there's the discount code. If you are a MFA member, your continuing education is at no cost because it's part of your membership. Quite a nice benefit. So let me turn this over to Ken Germano, who's the Executive Director of Medical Fitness, to introduce Dr. Pam Peeke. Ken, you there?
Thanks, Michaela. And thanks, everyone, for attending this exciting leading-edge presentation today at noon. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you giving your time to us. And at this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Pamela Peeke, who is an internationally recognized expert, physician, scientist, and author in the fields of nutrition, stress, fitness, and public health. On stage or in front of a camera, she combines her trademark energy, wit, and humor with the latest scientific data to motivate and educate audiences of all ages to transform themselves for healthy living. Dr. Peeke serves as a spokesperson for the American College of Medicine, touring exhibition, Changing the Face of Medicine. Dr. Peeke holds the position of Assistant Clinical Professor of Medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and is a Fellow of the American College of Physicians. A native of San Francisco and a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley, Dr. Peeke was awarded her baccalaureate in science and master's degree in public health and public policy before completing her medical degree at Michigan State University and residence in internal medicine at George Washington University. It is my great pleasure to give you and present Dr. Pamela Peeke. Pam.
Thank you very much, Ken, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that we have such a very large audience. I'm increasing my volume here a little bit. It's a beautiful autumn day, and it's a great time to be talking about what I love to call bleeding edge science, and also to be provocative and have some fun. And so welcome aboard, and I'd like to hop right in here so that we have plenty of time for questions as well. What I'd like to accomplish today is look at this, this traditional prescription for handling the issue of obesity, which is eat less, move more. And this has been the usual recommendation by experts for a very long period of time until now. And that is that there's no question that modifying your nutrition is important as well as your physical activity. But is it enough? Is it really enough? And here we really talk about the issue of maintenance, not just dropping weight. And as Jim Hill, Rena Wing, with the National Weight Control Registry and other scientists have made very clear over the years, removing excess body fat is very different than maintaining it in many respects. And this is something that we want to look at a little bit more in depth. All right, this is for the ladies in the audience, and so enjoy. It's a Friday. And I'm bringing this up because here we have a beautiful body. And let's just say this person has never had a weight issue in their life, and then they enter an obesogenic environment. There's a bit of a transformation, and now we have problems. This person carries this weight, in more ways than one, for a long period of time. Then at one point in their life, they decide, you know something, I'm turning this around completely. What I'd like to do is I'd like to just drop it and see if I can kind of, get back to where I was before. So they do. But the question is this the same person as the first one? And that is, in the weight-reduced state, how different is this person? And can ELM alone, eat less, move more, sustain this individual? And the answer is absolutely not. This individual now has been changed in many, many ways. As anyone knows and has tried, maintaining a significant degree of weight loss requires not only daily dedication, motivation, and sometimes a limitless supply of willpower, nothing short of maybe even a compulsive obsession. And this is something that we've also found among so many people, especially those today who have dropped enormous amounts of weight. For instance, in those people who have done this, they have shown an ability to adapt and adjust to significant change in their life. Let's look at one in particular who has literally redefined normal in her life. This is Betty Lou Sweeney. I'm the Chief Lifestyle Expert of WebMD, and if you go to my current blog on Everyday Fitness with Dr. Pam Peeke, what you'll find is her story. I must have gotten a zillion Twitters on this one for a lot of interesting reasons. One of the key hallmarks of this story is the following. That's Betty in pink at the age of 68. She had been heavy for many, many years. And had a rough childhood and all the rest of it. She's actually a nurse, part-time nurse now, happily married, and there she was. But she was also at that time on 26 medications, 26, for heart, kidney, and arthritis. And then one day she developed a kidney infection which became septic, leading her to the ICU and a respirator and near death. After that, she sort of got the wake-up call. Not everyone does, but she did. And at that time, she decided to walk right into, in this case, an Anytime Fitness facility up there in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and went ahead and began to turn it around. Quite frankly, her young trainer told her at the time that, you know, he basically said, you know, to himself, and he confessed to me later on when I interviewed him, that he gave her no more than 2 weeks because most people just flake out. They can't handle it. But she had a fervent desire never to have to see a respirator in an ICU again. So she lasted, and not only did she last, she dropped from 220 pounds to 110. She literally dropped half her body weight. And during this period of time, you know, literally, and I'll be going through this, did exactly what the National Weight Control Registry participants did, and then some. What's interesting about her is, and why she's holding up that little slate with 3658, she broke the Guinness Book of World Records in the plank in September 28th of this year, just about a month ago. And there she is with her trainer doing her little plank thing. For some reason, she likes to do the plank. And this just turned out to be really cool because it gave her that little goal, too. Now, the question is, here she is, she's 71 years old. 71, right? Is she the same as this 71-year-old? This is a 71-year-old who is in the Masters Olympics, who I met when I was working with the Olympics at Carnegie Mellon. And this woman has never had an extra, you know, pound on her other than a couple pregnancies. And as you can see from her guns, she's never seen the inside of a gym. Want to guess where she lives? That's right, on a farm. And she just won the gold in the hurdles. She just found out one day she likes to jump over fences. Don't ask. But there she is. Now, is she the same person as our little friend Betty Lou? The answer is absolutely not. For that matter, this woman here can eat more and has a very different metabolic profile than Betty Lou. Now, what's all that about? Well, as it turns out, you know, the biology of the post-weight loss state is nothing like the biology of someone who's never lost weight. And there are a million ways in which the psychoneurobiology, energy, physiology, and metabolism in anyone who's lost weight are remarkably different from someone who is, as it were, naturally of that weight. So in this case, let's say they both weigh 110 pounds. One's dropped 110 pounds, and one's never had to do that. So does this mean that Betty Lou eats exactly what this woman does here? Absolutely not. She actually has to be far more careful, far more vigilant, and in interviewing her about this, Betty Lou made it very, very clear that her level of vigilance was exceptionally heightened on a daily basis, that she looked at each day 24 hours in advance saying, okay, I'm going to get through one more day. She could never assume that this weight and this body composition that she currently has, as fit as she is going to be, as it were, easy to maintain without significant vigilance, which is also very interesting. When you're looking at the issue of ELM, where is that executive function part of this, the behavioral change part of this? We're looking here at optimizing the function of the prefrontal cortex and its ability to rein in impulsivity, which she clearly had, and also to be able to make the right choices, stay in the present, etc. So in many respects, her athletic behavior has helped her, as it were, beef up a lot of that. And there is recent evidence that increasing your physical activity from couch potato to consistently regular and hopefully adding in the high-intensity interval training also seriously augments prefrontal cortex function and as well as size, which is really quite interesting. So if you have a 150-pound person out there who's dropped about 20 pounds, to maintain their new 130 pounds, they actually now have to live like someone who seems to be naturally 110 instead of 130. You really have to be much more vigilant. What is that? That's something that has been referred to as the energy gap. And this comes from wonderful work that has been done by University of Colorado scientists. And in this, and this is Paul McLean's wonderful work, and in this they look at the issue of energy gap. And this energy gap means that you have this, you have the inability to maintain a normal weight at that new normal, as Betty Lou has achieved, without heightened caloric scrutiny, so that's energy in, and regularized and consistent energy out, which is her athleticism. And an average individual who was walking around at 110 pounds and 71 years old and a female who'd never had a weight issue in her life may not have to go anywhere near that level of vigilance as well as expenditure, energy expenditure. But Betty Lou has to make up for that energy gap. If you look at the National Weight Control Registry itself, as many of us know, I believe the cohort now is close to 10,000. It's almost a 20-year-old study, which has been a joint venture on the part of Rena Wing at Brown University and Jim Hill at University of Colorado. And they've basically been studying what we call successful losers, for lack of a better term. And these are men and women, and as you can see, it's 80% women, 20% men, so it is a skewed population. And the grand majority of the people did not show cultural diversity. And so most of these are fairly well-educated and Caucasian. What they have done in the past 5-6 years now is they've added in new cohorts, including bariatric surgery people, as well as they're now looking at children and teens, which is going to be an off-branch of this. So that's why right now you see a weight loss of an average of 66 pounds and having maintained that for at least 5.5 years. Again, part of that is a bit skewed because of the bariatric population making that quite a bit of weight versus what it used to be, say, about 8 years ago, where it was closer to 40 pounds or so. The weight losses have had a huge, range from 30 to 300 pounds. The way to get into the study is to drop 30 pounds and to maintain that for 1 year. Then you can qualify to get into the study. If you continue to to drop the weight, that's perfectly fine. There are ways where they update the current profiles and the status, but the key is to maintain at least that 30 pounds. And then look at the spectrum for how long these people have kept the weight off, anywhere from a year to 66 years, because many of these people who've come on board were simply people who heard about the study and they've kept weight off for many years to start with. And again, some of them have dropped it fairly quickly. Others took upwards of 14 years. It didn't really matter. The bottom line was they adhered to the criteria. And as you can see that there was an almost even split between those people who basically just went out there and figured it out on their own, reading books and various, and other people who had some type of help from a program and more of the organized programs out there. And all of them, just about all of them, modified their food intake. I mean, they had to. There was no question. And then just about all of them also increased their physical activity. And interestingly enough, this study and all the other studies show that the most popular form of physical activity is walking, which is very, very easy and accessible, and that's all good news. The other thing about the physical activity is that they were accruing, and now this is what's very important. This gets back to Betty Lou again and that whole issue of ELM. They were accruing at least 400 calories of energy expenditure on a daily basis for an accrual of 2,800 for the week. That's a lot. When I say a lot, I mean, for me, I love it. But for the grand majority of average people out there, this is extra scheduled physical activity above and beyond activities of daily living. So people were going out of their way to get in those 4 miles of walking a day at roughly 100 calories a mile, and also doing their weight training, etc. And that was a little bit more spotty, but the grand majority of them were, and this was fascinating because it was across the board, as though everyone had figured out that they had an energy gap, that they couldn't just suddenly sit back with their best friend who had never gained a pound in their life, and now they were both the same weight. But that person who was weight reduced most definitely had an energy gap that constantly had to be made up. That and this was something that these people had figured out on their own. Most report continuing to maintain. When you say a low-calorie, low-fat diet, it's interesting. We're looking at this a little bit with a little bit more scrutiny. It did seem to be that these people who had come out of the low-fat era were adhering a little bit more to that, but we're starting to see much more diversity with regard to lower carbohydrate intakes as well. I don't mean extreme by any means. I'm just simply meaning that if classic Americans are ingesting 500 to 600 grams of carbohydrate a day, and most of it's trash, some of the lower carbohydrate people were taking in 150 grams to 200 grams. And really a span between 100 to 200 seemed to be the average, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of that coming up. And of course, some of the key things here, they almost all eat breakfast every single day. That happens to be the #1 predictor of success. It turned out to be having a healthy breakfast every day. Not just breakfast, but a healthy breakfast. These people monitor themselves. Here's that prefrontal cortex kicking in again. That vigilance, what am I? So they don't go floating off because they know psychobiologically that they will. And this doesn't mean obsessions about this. It simply means monitoring, nothing different than looking at how much fuel you have in your car tank. 62% watch less than 10 hours of TV. Now I'm going to bring this up and obviously the exercise piece. What's really interesting about this, and this is, I mean, there's been a huge volume of research that's come out of this study, but one thing I really want to stress, and you're really going to want to hear this big because now I'm going to be launching into some really exciting science, is the fact that the #1 thing these people did was they changed up almost everything in their environment. What do I mean by that? I mean people, places, and things. If the people had to be able to support them, or if they were saboteurs or, just basically enablers, for poor habits. The grand majority of these participants, and Betty Lou, when I was interviewing her, was a perfect example of this. She just ran from the people who used to, really enable poor habits. She doesn't need that anymore. All the research has now shown that this is exceptionally important, that it's very infectious when you start, hanging out with people who will help support this entire healthy lifestyle endeavor. At the same time, environment per se. People change up where they live. People change up marriages, partnerships, relationships. People change up careers. They have to formulate an environment within which they are able to most easily support their lifestyle. And Betty Lou, I remember, cracked me up when she said, yeah, I pitched my sister-in-law. She's driving me crazy. Oh, okay. Whatever works. But she was very firm about that. That sister-in-law was toxic to her, and that didn't work. And it's really important to understand the power of this. So we go back to people who have been taken out of their typical environments and have dropped weight. We look at the early Biggest Loser models, and then they're plucked right back into the same environment and then wipe the shock off your face when the weight comes right back on again, because you put them back in, as it were, an obesogenic environment. And so these people, almost all 10,000 of them, figured this out on their own. They weren't going to be able to make this work unless they were able to create a healthy environment, not an obesogenic environment. And really, sometimes it's not even that radical. You can get rid of the M&Ms off your secretary's desk, or, it goes on. And these things seem to be trivial. They're not. They all add up. Now, let me take you into a really exciting new scientific frontier, which is really going to help us understand now why just eating less and moving more does not explain what's been going on here, right? And I don't know how many of you have heard of epigenetics. I'm here in Washington, actually Bethesda, and we have the magnificent Human Genome Project going on, but guess what? We have an epigenome project as well, and I'm going to help you understand what this is all about, right? So, turns out that there's a second genome called the epigenome. Epigenome, what does it mean? It means literally in addition to or above the genome. And while the recently completed Human Genome Project identified just about 25,000 genes, these genes still need instructions for what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and that's where the epigenome comes in, and this is how powerful this is. So, what we're looking at now is something that is really groundbreaking. It's a real milestone of science. So, let me explain this. Access to your own DNA is very important in order to be able to change genetic expression. So when Betty Lou was eating piles of donuts, that was actually causing changes in her genetic expression. You may call it the ho-ho gene connection. We never really understood the middleman in all of this. Clearly, we have brilliant studies that have been done in the past, the Omni Health Heart Study and others, that have shown that when you change up specific nutritional intake, lo and behold, you change disease risk, and you change metabolic profiles, and the metrics are there. You see the changes in cholesterol and all the rest of it. But let's go back for a moment and let's play with this. When we're talking about epigenetics, we're talking about non-DNA inheritance, meaning that you have the same DNA. I have DNA for blue eyes. Maybe you have it for brown eyes. Nothing's changing. I'm not changing the color of my eyes here. It's not going to happen. However, there are other genes in my genome that are more malleable, where I can actually change expression, because long ago in utero, the DNA for my particular color of my eye already took place. It was already influenced. It was something that we call methylated. When you methylate a gene, right, you change it. And when you do that, you turn it off. So the brown eye gene in me was turned off early on, and the blue eye one was left unmethylated, and here I am. So what happens when we eat that ho-ho and all the rest of it? Well, as it turns out, let me show you, that, and I'm only going to have 2 of these nauseating slides, and then we'll get into a colorful one. So here you see that when there's no methylation of a gene, you have an active gene. When you methylate that gene, then what you do is you bind the DNA in a special way, and you literally inactivate it, therefore either turning off gene expression or turning it off somewhat, because clearly there's plenty of room in between. So what's really fascinating about this is exactly what goes on a consistent basis as we sit here and doing our webinar right now. Whatever you're drinking right now, that cup of coffee, the fact that you're sitting instead of standing, the ambiance of the environment where you're sitting right now, what's happening is you have some little critters in there. They're called histones. Now, when I did molecular biology, we knew what a histone, we gave it a name. We didn't know what it did. Only recently do we now understand these little histones hang out around genes. They are the genetic referee. That's what they do. And what they do is they basically scan and monitor the environment. So if you're eating a ho-ho versus an apple, okay, then what you may end up doing is causing some change, either methylation or demethylation of that DNA, to therefore cause the gene to express itself one way or the other, So that's really kind of cool stuff. So the real question is, are your histones happy today? Did you do a little exercise in the morning? What's going on with all that? That's what's really important here. So now, one of the things I want to show you is how all of this came together in possibly one of the most elegant experiments that has ever been done, which basically ushered in the era of the epigenome. And I'm going to introduce you to a couple little characters here. These are what we call the agouti mice. And agouti mice are very special. These are actually sisters. These are identical mice. They're identical by their DNA. They're completely identical. So you say, huh? How can they be identical? Twins, as it were. They don't even look like it. I'll explain. In the yellow obese mouse, the agouti gene, and this is why we call it, and that's A-G-O-U-T-I, the agouti gene is unmethylated and is turned on all the time. While in the brown mouse, what they did was we played with it. The gene is completely methylated and shut down. Now, what is that gene? I'll tell you what the gene is. What the gene does is it causes that mouse to become obese, all right? It causes that mouse to be at very high risk for cancer, diabetes, as well as heart disease. So this agouti mouse, as it were, is very, very at extremely high risk for very bad diseases, the metabolic syndrome, whereas the lean brown-coated mouse is absolutely clean. It has not a single risk factor for any of these, nor is it obese. And this is very interesting. So what we've done with these mice, and since we know the genome so well, one of the things we've done is we have we've played with them a little bit just to kind of see whether or not we can show changes in the epigenome. So get this. then this is really interesting stuff, right? If we take these mice, and if I just take the plain old agouti mouse, the yellow mouse, and if I now feed it food that has also been tainted with BPA, which is bisphenol A, or that chemical that's found in plastic products. So one of the things we find is that when we fed the pregnant mothers these agouti mice this BPA, we noticed that the number of offspring with the yellow obese coat increased dramatically. And we also saw that maternal exposure to this chemical decreased the DNA methylation in the offspring and turned this agouti gene on when it's supposed to be off. So in other words, what happened is, if I take just a lean brown mouse and feed it this BPA, what it will do is it will literally change the genome. I just fed it something, and if this brown mouse were to become pregnant, now what I have is more yellow mice. Very, very interesting. And of course we've looked at the genome, and what we found was, lo and behold, the agouti gene was turned on by this toxic chemical. That was interesting. So then we did a second study, and the second study was fascinating. And this is the Mac Daddy, and then we'll end this, because this really helps you understand the power of what you put in your mouth. And we haven't even gone into the physical activity end of this. All right, so we started a second study, and the pregnant mothers were exposed to the BPA again, plus this time nutritional supplementation, and we specifically gave them supplements that were what we call methyl donors. Now remember, if I'm methylating something, I'm going to turn off that gene, and I'm looking to turn off that agouti gene so that you're not obese and you're not at high risk for disease. So we gave them folic acid and genstein, which is a common ingredient that most of you know is in soy products. And the level of soy that was provided was similar to that of people who eat a high soy diet or people who live in Asia. And once we did this, we observed that the offspring were no longer yellow and no longer obese, and that there were more offspring with a slender brown coat phenotype. And also, they lost, they didn't have any of the obesity, nor did they have any of the disease risk. And there was only one thing that happened, one thing, and that was a nutritional intervention in this very powerful experiment. And what's really great about this is because there's differences in phenotypes. In other words, the visual is so fascinating. You could really see these changes going on, and you could really play with this as you know, and you look at the power of good nutrition versus bad nutrition. I love this because, again, this was one of the classic experiments that really told us we were on the right track with all of this. So the traditional thinking about human health and disease affected by genetics and the environment, you know, is there. Whenever you have identical twins and have different disease status, you know, you have a beautiful opportunity to be able to study genetics and environment. With epigenetic gene regulation, we can see that we can no longer say whether genetics or the environment has a bigger impact, because it may be not only what you're exposed to, but what your mother and potential grandparents were exposed to, maybe even your father. And as it turns out, it's actually true. I've just had a conversation with some epigeneticists who've now seen that the paternal donation to this epigenetic phenomenon is actually quite profound as well. So these kind of studies show we can no longer say whether genetics or the environment have a greater impact on your health, because the two are now inextricably linked through the epigenome. And it also suggests, all of this, that in the future we may be able to protect individuals from negative epigenetic profiles either by modifying diet, physical activity, and of course there's always that issue of those drugs, and I try to run away from that as much as I possibly can. But this gives you an example of how you can actually play this. So we've actually seen human examples of this agouti mouse type thing, by the way, in a number of human experiences over history. And you can see this played out. For instance, some of you may remember the famous Dutch hunger winter that took place in 1944 and 1945, where there was massive starvation. People were basically living on about 500 kcal a day, down from 1,000 when the ugly time had first begun, and these people basically were starving. And when you actually look at 6 decades later, looking at these the progeny of the people who had survived the Dutch hunger winter, what they actually found was that these people, the children, many of them, had less methylation on their IGF-2 gene compared to their unexposed same-sex brother or sisters, and therefore these people were at higher risk for glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, high cholesterol, hypertension, and higher rates of obesity. So here we see it playing out many generations later, just to kind of illustrate the point that we're trying to make. Now, what's also interesting is if you remember the pictures I showed you of that very handsome man who turned into a very fat one and then back into a very handsome man again, the real question is, and we don't know the answer yet, so please don't ask it because I'm going to give you the answer now, and that is how many of these changes are mutable. Once you've gone through methylations and demethylations, do you do that completely? The answer is for those people who have especially had very significant methylation, demethylation changes, and especially for those who've had prolonged experience with this, like our little friend Betty Lou, that there's probably some level, do we know what level? I don't know, of irreversible change. And thus, this may help us understand what this gap is, this energy gap is. We're far from understanding this in a big way, but we're working on the mechanism of action right now just from the genetic level. So we're digging our way through this one way or the other. So there you have some very exciting science. And here's some practical applications. Oh, well, let's see now. We were methylating quite nicely, and then we changed things over time now, didn't we? So we've created an environment here where we're making it very easy for a specific genetic expression. In the middle, we were expressing quite nicely, throwing the spears around and doing our thing, and sitting hunched over at our brand new iPhone and iPad and something is obviously creating an environment where the histones are picking up on this in a big way with the sedentary environment, as well as the strange things we put in our mouths when we sit in front of screens for prolonged periods of time. And this is affecting our very genetic expression, which is why we have really neat things like this. Please make sure to read the lovely work by James Levine at Mayo Clinic on sitting disease. This shows you some of the things that take place, everything from fat-burning enzymes, for all intent and purposes, shutting down when you've been sitting for prolonged periods of time with no physical activity, no fidgeting, basically frozen in front of any kind of screen, you name it, back and forth that he has studied, and looking at disease risk. I mean, there's absolutely no question as you go down this list that there's this domino effect. But look at the cholesterol metabolism. That didn't happen overnight. This is from prolonged sitting, day in, day out, month in, year in, et cetera, et cetera. We're affecting genetic expression once again. And of course, he came up with a very lovely non-exercise activity thermogenesis solution. You know, get off your butt at least 10 minutes an hour. You know, just standing up doubles your metabolic rate. Fidgeting, dancing, running around, doing everything you can to assume the vertical whenever you can keeps your histones very happy, I might add. I had to throw this in here. One of my patients heard that, and he'd been sitting for a long time. He was a major executive here in Washington, and he ended up dropping about 60 pounds. He has 5 stents in his heart. He has not yet had his bypass, and he's trying to get off as many meds as he can and get as healthy as he can after many years of sitting on his behind. And he also did what the National Weight Control Registry people did, which is he got out of town. This is up in Maine, far from, you know, the craziness here in Washington. And in order to keep it up, well, there it is. He chops wood, and he wanted me to see his wood in front of his lovely home in Maine. We joke amongst ourselves about his little energy gap up there. Okay, and then the final thing as we go through this, we're looking at the whole issue of the mental end of this. I know that many of you are mental health professionals and also people who deal with counseling and really trying to understand behavior. I'm going to tell you right now, not only does stress spelled backwards is dessert. This is something I discovered in 1991 when I was in my laboratory at the NIH. It's kind of fun. And it always reminds me of the fact that in Elm, where is this? We have to make sure that we are remembering that the mind is king, that without appropriate direction, vigilance, motivation, coaching, that we're going nowhere fast, that the technical end of this, eating less and modifying our diet and increasing our physical activity means nothing without the mind fully engaged here. So another new frontier, everyone is hopping on board in a heartbeat, and many people have been working away diligently with this for so long, is the behavior modification in a big way. But now really understanding that this is a psychobiological phenomenon. So it's not just about, you know, cranking up some extra willpower. By the way, a quick sidebar, a phenomenal book I would highly recommend you buy is the new book by Baumeister, B-A-U-M-E-I-S-T-E-R, and Tierney. And if you forget all that, just remember willpower. It came out about several weeks ago, and it's rediscovering willpower. It's got some really great, fun science and some delightful ways of now looking at what willpower is really all about, the new science of willpower. I highly recommend that. So, again, engaging the mind. You know, I stumbled in this at the NIH when I was there in my laboratory with Dr. George Crusoe, working with stress hormone. And here we started looking specifically at what happens to the body when you have too much stress hormone on board. This is a highlighted CAT scan, something we use in research to look at fat. And this is cut at about your belly button level. And if you can imagine, the lower part of this is someone's back. And this is a woman who is overweight. And she is approximately 40 years old, so she hasn't quite entered the perimenopause in a big way. And you can see that most of her fat's on the outside of her innards, as they say. You can see the abdominal muscle wall above, and all the white that you see is fat. So she has some fat inside. Look to the right, and you will see that I've taken away the subcutaneous fat, and you can see just the visceral fat, which is completely normal in her. And there you have it. I give you a 40-year-old woman with exactly the same stats, but someone who has extremely high levels of stress hormone. That is the only difference between these two women, and she has Cushing's disease. Now you see the difference. She has very high levels of visceral fat on board, and that's the only difference here was stress, was her high level of glucocorticoids on board. And for that, she ended up with not only a pile of visceral fat, but also a significant metabolic syndrome. All of this was reversed once the tumor, which is a benign tumor, the pituitary, was removed, and there was some permanent change. She still, once this individual dropped her weight, she still had that energy gap. She still had to work harder than she ever did before when she was of normal weight, and this person never had an issue with obesity to start with. Again, profound changes with just the mind, as it were, the stress issue. Fat cells, I just had to show them to you from my laboratory, the little culprits that they are. We're now talking about integrative fitness, and this is something I really want to make sure you understand. Integrative fitness now means the mind is the body is the mind. We understand the cross-pollination here now. This is just a much more holistic view. And in addition, this whole issue of transitioning and healing, this is a constant, dynamic, psychobiological process. And therefore, we go back to that epigenome. We go back to the constant monitoring, the constant tweaking, the constant refining. This is also extremely hopeful, by the way, because, you know, as I showed you, you can change that epigenome in countless times. People are immediately saying, oh my God, you know, the people I work with who've been yo-yoing for years and turned it into a second career. Well, the bottom line is, yes, there is some permanent damage. There's no question. But there's enough in there that you can continuously change to be able to sustain the ability to hold on to that new body composition and that new metabolic profile that's healthier. You just work at it a little bit harder, and you've got that extra, you know, vigilance. This is a great picture. I'm a triathlete. You can see me there in the blue, the tall one. And these are some of my wonderful patients who, for reasons I'll never understand, come along with me on these crazy ventures, and we're doing the Iron Girl. And every single one of these people is a living example of what this epigenetic process is all about. The woman with the dark glasses, she left her regular ones at home, is down 130 pounds. And she will never be someone who can hold on to that 150 pounds she is now, like the woman next to her, who is different in her own way. Breast cancer gave her that belly, along with the tamoxifen, and she's actually down 60 pounds. But will she ever be what she was before? She will be better. She's definitely down, but it will be a struggle because of the energy gap. She's achieved extremely high levels of fitness despite that, and she's done extremely well. And the woman underneath my right armpit there with the blue, with her head kinked over and her little orange shoe, that is a retired lieutenant colonel in nursing corps, and she has removed over 50 pounds. And and again, to show you, you know, the grand majority of that obesity came from primarily depression. There was no obesity in her family. That's why it is. This whole issue is one of obesity is not a homogeneous process by any means. And every single one of these women has their own story and their own epigenetic load. And the final piece here before I end is I just wanted all of you to be able to have an opportunity to become familiar with a new provocative obesity staging system, which takes into consideration so much of this, so that we're no longer doing just the, you know, eat less, move more. And this comes from the lovely work done up in Canada by Sharma and his people with the Canadian Obesity Society. And it's an interesting and provocative way of looking at this. So that if you're looking at BMIs of 30 and above, is everyone the same at that point? Absolutely not. I mean, think about this. People are there at different journeys. I mean, you could have a BMI of 30, but maybe a year ago your BMI was 40. So what do we do with that? And maybe all your comorbidities disappeared, but you're still a BMI of 30. What do we do with that? Obviously, we continuously try to improve and refine. But there is a staging system now, as you can clearly see. And that staging system shows that you can have a BMI of 30, but no comorbidities. So you're given a stage of 0 and then 1, and it just continues to go up. You have 1 or 2 comorbidities, but everything is mild. This also includes physical as well as mental. All right, so we're always looking at the psychological, you know, end of this as well, and you know, whether or not there's any significant impairment, both physically and mentally. And as we increase the stages, we start increasing the level of intensity of the comorbidities themselves. Now we start seeing obesity-related chronic illnesses and physical limitations. And now one of the things we really want to do is really look at all potential behavioral, pharmacologic, even surgical treatment options if it's really that profound. And as we look at stage 3, we start seeing some end organ damage, and now real disability, again, physically, mentally, and otherwise. And then in stage 4, we see the highest level, and this is where we really want to become extremely aggressive. Again, eat less, move more is a piece of this, but it is a piece of a very complex equation. So when we're looking at what we always look at on a daily basis, sometimes mission impossible, is ELM enough? Eating less, moving more? Nah, not at all. All right, we're done.
Awesome. I feel incredibly motivated.
All right. I'm more than happy to take your little questions here.
Excellent. So if you have questions for Pam, please type them into the box, and I will pass them on to you. So this is exciting stuff. I can imagine it must be just a pleasure to do your work on a day-to-day basis.
Well, what I love is the excitement of the newer data coming down and the application of this on a day-by-day basis. I just can't wait for the science to catch up in a big way with where we're trying to go today. I'm needless to say, I take a patience pill here, but I think that we can all agree that the simplistic model no longer suffices. We don't trash it. We simply say that it's a piece, an integral piece of a very complex equation.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, here's a question. Kim wants to know, so how does somebody, like, I guess like her, out in the field, how to make this information known, how to use this with, with clients or...
Well, we're in the process, and it's a great question. We're in the process of trying to assemble a lot of this information because it's coming out as fast and furious. I think for the time being, what you have to do is just do the get real thing. When someone is clearly out of balance, when they're carrying too much excess body fat, to stress to them that that what they're going to be doing is not only modifying diet for health, aiming to reduce whatever kind of comorbidities they may have and to improve their health and well-being, but the fact that however they're doing it right now, they will continue for the rest of their lives. There's no, aha, I've reached, whatever, milestone, and now I can sit back. No, that's not going to work. And nor does it work for anybody. I mean, it's just that they're going to have to understand, and this is key, right up front, to teach these people how to be vigilant, not in an obsessive, crazy way, just to be vigilant, and to practice that vigilance. And by doing so, when they reach appropriate milestones, it becomes easier to be able to monitor because they're calling upon that executive function in their prefrontal cortex on a routine basis. They've literally beefed up their mental muscle, and it'll be easier than just, you cannot do this on willpower alone. Never. No, don't even try. It's never going to happen. And just read the book. I mean, it's straightforward. You're going to deplete whatever you thought you had for willpower. You don't do that. What I would also do is to really make clear what the motivation and meaning behind the desire for change. I always do that with people when I'm working with them so that I get a clear vision with them of the driver, for their change. And the more powerful the driver, the greater the passion, the less willpower you need because it's already driven from deep inside. And it makes it a much easier venture all the way through.
Makes good sense. Yeah, we've got a bunch of questions now. Mary says, I reached a 100-pound weight loss goal in 2005, went back to school for a health promotion degree, and promptly gained 50 of it back over the course of 4 years. What advice would you have for her as a health educator trying to influence change in others?
Okay, so what you did was you Mary had dropped this weight, was highly focused, was really on top of the program, had that strategy down, and then guess what? Her environment changed, right? Her environment changed, so it became, as it were, obesogenic, and it doesn't take much. It's not like you have to live, at Hershey Park here. What it was there was just enough that affected the specific triggers that increase this. That's why it takes a while to be able to learn how to get that vigilance down. So Mary, your epigenome's just sitting there waiting on you. What you want to do now is turn it around. And what you do is you fashion, just like the National Weight Control Registry folks and the rest of them, fashion an environment within which you are now supported to be able to do the appropriate things as best you can. Nothing's ever perfect. I'm not stupid. I mean, clearly, we're always going to have challenges. My God, you just walk down the street and there's junk food everywhere. But you can also try as best you can where you live, where you work, to make it as safe a haven as possible for you to be able to turn that around yourself, and at the same time teach others how to be able to achieve vigilance and sustain that vigilance. By doing so, you make some very profound changes that will help you to cement these behavioral modifications you've got to do.
Great. Okay, well, here's a question from Michael. He says, didn't hear anything about the importance of iodine in the diet or the benefit potential of hypnosis and behavior change.
Okay, well, that's because I only have an hour. Well, actually, less than an hour. I'm good, but I'm not miraculous. So I'm not going to go through minerals and vitamins while I'm at it. No, seriously. What I'd like to do is just stick to the bigger, topic, which is the behavioral piece. There are a lot of different interventions that are really quite, viable. And clearly, anything within the psychological domain. And I'm going to tell you one in particular that I'm an absolute advocate of, and that's meditation. If you look at the science of one particular kind of meditation, and I just like looking at the types of meditation that have had really strong science because I find that compelling, it's interesting, is transcendental meditation. The TM has been studied terrifically. It's just, all it is basically just a very simple technique. It doesn't involve anything more than, 20 minutes of meditation twice a day, but it's a very profound technique. And, this we have found has had very, very profound effects upon everything from addiction to ADD to post-traumatic stress to depression, anxiety. Really powerful. There's a great new book out by my colleague, Dr. Norman Rosenthal from the National Institute of Mental Health, emeritus. It's called Transcendence. And it is an absolute must, and it is superb. It really goes through the science of meditation. And so I thoroughly believe, whether it's hypnosis, meditation, however you want to play this, I think that there is great credibility and validity, and I think it also has to be individualized and customized for each individual. We're way past just slopping everybody together and saying, you should all benefit from this at the highest level. Many people don't, and because they have their own, their own unique stories and biology. So I'm a complete advocate of that.
Awesome. Let's see. I think we can do one more. Steve wants to know, based on the new science, how do you think this will impact current and future childhood obesity efforts?
Boy, I'll tell you one thing. As this science comes out, hold on to your chairs wherever you are right now, because what I'm going to say is going to blow your socks off. When you, as a male or female adult, have all of this going on in you, okay, as you're sitting there, you have what happened to you, just like in that Dutch, starvation thing. You have what happened to you 3 generations ago. You have whatever your parents gave you. You have whatever's happened to you environmentally, out of your control. You have to live in a city and there's pollution, whatever. You have your own choices that you've made from whatever reason. So you have all that going on, right? And that is affecting the epigenome. And if you have consistent behaviorisms, then those are passed on to your progeny, which means that now we take this whole issue of what happens to moms and dads is, they become moms and dads to a much higher level. This is a really very, very provocative issue. What you eat and how you conduct yourself before, you get pregnant and before a man and a woman, give that little genetic endowment, it's going to be passed on to the kids. And we already know this. Junk food eating moms have junk food eating children. And this science is already out there. But now we actually have a lot of the genetic pieces. So I think this is going to be a very, very profound change in a lot of what we're doing. We're going to be looking at people, moms and dads themselves, and really asking them to take themselves on and to really make changes now, because those children are helpless, and then to do everything they possibly can to optimize the health and well-being of that child through their own daily practices. So long gone are going to be the days of someone who do this to me all the time. When a mom and dad comes in with an obese child, fix this kid. Really? What about you? This is a family affair. When I was host of the National Body Challenge for the Discovery Network, I was insisting upon families. I'm working with one person, families, because that's the name of the game. And so families, communities, virtual communities, real communities, in person. Suddenly we're going to see that everything we do and everything, everywhere we live is just interconnected, and it's all affecting our epigenomes, and we're passing this on. So how about we take this on in a higher level of public policy? That's what I see.
Mm. Well, it's certainly going to be enlightening and exciting to watch this as it develops. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and thrilled to know you're just down the street. So let's have coffee sometime.
All right. Well, this was my pleasure, and I hope everyone got a little something out of this that they can use in their wonderful work.
Yeah. Oh, and I should say that you are doing a keynote for the Medical Fitness Association conference coming up in about 6 weeks in Orlando. So if we don't get coffee before, I'll buy you a cup there.
I hope so.
Okay.
And I hope to see a lot of people there.
Yeah, I think you will. Thanks so much,
all right,
everyone. Have a great weekend, Pam, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.